everybody. Welcome to a new year and a new project. You might be saying, Ara, that's an old project. You already finished that project. I know. However, I have been holding onto this project for a while with the idea of doing something new with it. You may have remembered I put Cardboard House 2 on my projects list sometime last year when I thought I was going to have a lot more time. And I think right now is a good time to start it. However, it's not going to be Cardboard House 2, it's going to be the Cardboard Shop. I'll get more into that later. My plan is to take it apart and turn it into something different.
I didn't explain that very well. I plan to take the cardboard house apart and use it within the cardboard shop. So that's what I'm talking about here. It will be the ultimate recycling project.
But before I do that, I want to make a pattern of what I have already created. So this video is going to be over the process of making that pattern. I put a lot of time and effort into the creating of this house and all the furniture on the inside. And for the furniture, I did make patterns, but the house, I didn't. And for me personally, as someone who owns a store where I sell my designs, pattern making is incredibly important. So without further ado, I'm gonna get started on creating the pattern of the original cardboard house. Let's get started.
First, I'll remind you of what the cardboard house currently looks like. And if you want to see more about the creation and the process of this house coming together, I will link the original playlist down in the description box below. I build the house and all the furniture that goes with it. The structure consists of the main house body, the tower, and a set of stairs. I kept them separate because it's a pretty big house, so they're easier to move around. And thankfully, now I think it will make it easier to create this piece step by step within my pattern, doing each piece one at a time. Even though the furniture is gone, I still have a few of the accessories that were attached to the interior of the house. I also have some wall hangings, some drapes, some rugs I think I still have. And I'm hoping all of this can be reused, creating the ultimate recycled project where I literally take an old project and recycle it into a new project. To get started on this, I'm going to remove all of the accessories and put them in a safe place. I do think my future idea for the cardboard shop has room for several of these items, and I'll probably stay in a similar color wave. I'm not quite sure the term that I'm going for here. So all of this should still work. Color scheme. That is the word I was trying to figure out. Thankfully, most of these accessories, including the drapes, were put on with hot glue, which means it's fairly easy to pull them off. It does create a little bit of damage on the walls, but I will be able to repair that when I am repurposing this project. I'm also able to easily remove the doors because they were just hung on pegs with toothpicks. And because they came off in one piece, I might be able to repurpose them into a new table, or they might be shutters for windows, or they might be doors again. I'm not quite sure yet. The only one I had a hard time getting off was this little shelf with 2 candles and a hanging little kitchen towel, which is actually one of my favorite accessories in the entire house. So I did want to safely remove it from the structure. It took a little bit of convincing with my craft knife, but I did get it off, and I will safely put it off to the side. Now we can get to the measuring. So I am an avid ruler collector. This is where it comes in handy. I have all the tools I need to start figuring out the pattern for this structure. In some areas, I can still see the seams where the individual pieces of cardboard went together, and that's going to be helpful. I could also watch back my old videos, which would help as well, but a lot of this information I can take from just looking at the house that I built. To begin marking down the pattern, I'm first sketching the general shape of the exterior walls. This is going to help me get the overall dimensions. So I'm going to kind of go from large dimensions down to the detailed dimensions, which you will see. I didn't have to add the door and window shapes, but they kind of help me know which part of the house is being measured and which wall it is. The first measurement I'm taking is where the second floor lands, because this is going to be a common measurement between each wall. This is going to help me in my pattern overall, because when I start putting into the computer, I can have that line go across all of the walls. Then I can start measuring the general shape and marking down how tall each piece is. And at this point, I realized I did not add the triangle tops to the side walls. So this is definitely a process where you may realize, oh, I didn't even draw the shape of the walls correctly initially. I need to adjust that. So that's why I'm using a pencil. This is an interesting process for me because typically I make my patterns first and then build upon those patterns that I've put into the computer or down on paper. This is the first time I've taken something, especially something as organic as the cardboard house, and turned it into a rigid pattern. So now that I have all of my outside dimensions, the length and heights of the wall, I'm now going to make a bigger drawing, which is going to have the doors and windows. This is going to allow me to draw the dimensions a little bit better in between all of the openings in the wall. So this would include things like the threshold, which I currently have the ruler up against. It tells me how high I need to create this piece so that it covers up the edge of the floor, which is being glued up against the wall. And then it also helps me draw out the size of the door, the size of the windows, how far up the wall the window is, all of those individual dimensions, which will help me put this all into the computer. There is also a bump out bay window at the very top of this wall, so I'm trying to include that. And then it was kind of hard to get the dimensions of the window in there, so I just drew it off to the side. So if you're ever trying this process yourself to document your own buildings, just if you need more room, make your drawing bigger so that you can add your measurements and your dimensions wherever you need them to be. So after a lot of sketching, measuring, writing down dimensions, I was able to finally get over to the computer and start putting all of this information in permanently. So hopefully in the future, I have a pattern that I can share with you. For this process, I'm going to be using a program called Inkscape. It is a free computer program, and even if you don't use laser cutters or Cricut, this is a great tool to document your own patterns where you could sell them as like a PDF download. I love Inkscape, and I find that I can do most things that I need to in Inkscape. And there are a ton of YouTube tutorials, so I don't have any tutorials on Inkscape, but if you do decide to try something like this, you can look on like anything I can think of that I'm like, how do I do this? I can look it up and there is a YouTube tutorial somewhere on how to do something in Inkscape. And this is not sponsored, I just like this program. Much like the process of first recording down the dimensions, I'm doing the big parts or the outer dimensions first. I'm trying to get the shape of the walls so that I can have that down pat before I start putting any openings for the windows and doors. Once I have the exterior dimensions, it's just a matter of spacing everything out so that it fits within relation to each other. So as you can see, I use a lot of rectangles to get the right height and the right width for each of my pieces. And I just kind of add them around to make sure that I have, like for example, this window needs to be about 2 inches off of the floor of this piece. So I'm adding a 2-inch rectangle to get the right height for my window. There may be a more sophisticated way to do this. I am not an Inkscape expert. I just do what works for me. But in the end, I have a pattern that I'm happy with, and I do feel is pretty close to what I measured. I also got dimensions for this little bay window, the interior wall, and then the floors for the bottom floor and the second floor level.
So now I have all of my dimensions that I took on the outside of the house in the computer. You might be wondering, Ara, how are you going to check this pattern? Are you going to completely rebuild the cardboard house to make sure that what you're putting into the computer actually works? And the answer to that is yes, kind of. But I'm going to build it much smaller. This is a 1-inch scale house, which means that 1 inch equals a foot. This is a quarter scale house, which means that a quarter of an inch equals a foot. So this is 25% of the size of this project. I need to be really careful when I'm doing this because not only am I shrinking the height and the width of each piece, but I also need to shrink the thickness. For this project, that is a little complicated because I just used whatever cardboard was around the house at the time. So I don't specifically remember how thick it was, and now it's covered in a coating. Most cardboard is about an 1/8 inch thick. So if I pretend that this is an 1/8 inch, we'll just pretend like this is an 1/8 inch. Half of an 1/8 inch is a 1/16 inch. Half of a 1/16 inch is 1/32 of an inch. This is why people use centimeters and millimeters a lot. Anyway, this material is a 32 inch thick. So not only have I shrunk the pattern of the cardboard house, I also shrunk the thickness of the material that I have cut it out on. So in theory, if I have done this correctly, I should be able to put this house together in a much smaller form and still have a correct pattern that would go together in the correct thickness of material in 1/12 scale or 1 inch scale. They're the same thing. It's very complicated. I actually have a video on scale. If you're interested, I will link it down below if you're just going, I have no idea what you're talking about. That video kind of covers it all. It covers all the different names of the scales and how to move up and down in scale. So if that's something you're interested in hearing more about, that video will be very helpful. All of that being said, I am now going to take my little miniature quarter scale pattern, start putting it together to make sure it works before I start adding more dimensions and more pieces of the house. So let's get started.
At this point, you may be noticing that I have cut out each of the shapes twice. The reason for this is the original cardboard house has double thick walls, which means 2 layers of cardboard. So I need to account for that in my pattern. So instead of having a 32 inch thick wall, I need to double it to account for the 2 layers of cardboard that are in my cardboard house original pattern. So I'm going to glue all of these shapes together, making sure that the edges line up exactly. I put them under some flat 1, 2, 3 blocks so that they could dry flat, and then I was ready to start putting it all together. One of the things I have to keep in mind is that cardboard is really good at bending, and so I still have to use a material that's also good at bending. So chipboard is somewhat okay with this. I had to be a little bit careful. I used 2 rulers, and this helped me keep it from bending at a point where I didn't want it to bend. So cardboard is a little bit easier to work with, I would say, than chipboard, but I couldn't have used mat board in this instant because mat board does not bend very well. I started by gluing the wider panel onto the sides, and this is going to give me a start on the structure of the house. And I keep forgetting to adjust my lighting. Hopefully you can see a little bit better now. I added my floor in there and immediately realized that it was not wide enough, so I had to cut a new piece, and each time I realize something is not working, I am going to update it in my pattern immediately. If I do not update it immediately, I may forget and then not have a working pattern by the end because there are so many individual pieces. Here I added the second floor and then immediately realized that the lower wall support was sticking out too far. It needs to go underneath the second floor and not stick out a little bit, so I adjusted that as well. I don't know why, but I was particularly excited to put this little bay window extension on the side of the house, and it worked perfectly the first time. I was so excited about that because it was kind of the first little, add-on to the basic structure of the house, and it was working. So that was great news. However, I did end up rebuilding the entire house structure because the bay window was not close enough to the edge of the project. I don't know if you can tell here how it was a little bit too far over, but I had to fix that before I moved on to the roof portion of this project, or everything would just kind of be messed up. So it was a necessary process to rebuild it, and now it is in the correct position. So this one was a little bit too far to the side, and now it is in the correct spot. And then I was also able to add some more details in the windows, such as the window on the bottom and then this door area. Originally, I hadn't added in the window mullions, and so this time around I did that so I could continue to add detail into my cardboard house pattern.
I have all the pattern pieces updated and adjusted based on my calculations, my findings, everything that I figured out was going wrong with this smaller model. So now I can continue to measure some of the other items, such as the roof, the porch, this little bump out area over here. All of those things can now build upon a pattern that I'm already happy with. And it's so cute.
Going slowly and making sure I'm happy with each part of this project before moving on was key to actually accomplishing this. I realize now that if I had taken measurements of every single part of this project, so while I had done the walls, I also measured the roof and any of the additional pieces on the exterior, I would have just had a jumble of problems that were kind of overwhelming to solve. A little trick for measuring rounded areas like this pop-out window is to use a piece of string, and then you can use the string against your ruler to see how long the piece needs to be to fit that rounded area. So I did a very rough sketch of the roof and that little pop out, and I went ahead and cut it out so I could try it onto my model. I'm not going to show you all of the computer process because it's rather boring and tedious, but just know that it was a process of going back and forth to my computer, to my studio desk, to the laser, to the computer, to the studio desk, trying to get everything to fit. As you can see, I'm having an issue with the alignment on my roof, on where it lines up with the bay window, and this little area on the right side is supposed to line up right above these two doors so that the tower can fit up against the house. So I adjusted it in my computer, I recut it, and then I could refit it. Thankfully, I know that the issue is not the lower part of my house because I already double checked that and made sure I was happy with that. So then all I had to do was adjust the roof before moving forward. Now I'm a lot happier with it, and I know that the roof is good. So if in the future, for example, if the tower isn't lining up well, I am going to have to adjust the tower and not worry about is it the tower or the roof, because the roof is checked off. You will see here there is a tiny gap where these pieces that go over the bay window show a bit of the wall underneath, but I do think it works out okay because the roof is covered and you cannot see these gaps from the inside. So it will be covered by whatever roofing goes on the roof. So I am happy with these pieces also, and I think it's looking pretty good. Moving on to the pop-out window, this little piece needs to be rounded. When I did it with cardboard, I could just cut slits in the cardboard, which would make a round shape fairly easily, but you can't really do that with chipboard very easily. I do realize later that it would have been smart to spray it with water, and I do follow the water process for the tower itself because the entire tower is rounded. So just know in the future, if you are trying something like this, water is key for bending chipboard. These half circle shapes are what's going to help this pop-out window keep its shape. I did realize it wasn't quite long enough to go all the way around the half circle, so I had to recut this piece just a tiny bit longer, but then of course I updated it in my pattern so I knew the right size that this piece needed to be for my finished cardboard house pattern. Now it's attached to the wall, and I forgot that I needed to also measure this little tiny roof that goes above the pop-out window. This was going to be difficult to measure and just kind of wrap my head around this shape. So what I did was take a scrap piece of paper and a Sharpie. I squished the paper onto the shape and then used a Sharpie to go around the outside edges of the roof. Then I could cut it out, scan it into my computer, and get the shape from that point. Now, if you don't have a scanner, you can also do this with your phone. Just take a picture of it and import it into Inkscape. That will give you the shape. You will just have to measure your piece to make sure that it is still the right size once you get it into your computer. But it really helped me with the rounded shape, and I was able to get a pretty close match to the roof, which did end up working when I added it onto my cardboard house project. So I was really happy with this process, and if I have more organic shapes like this is the way I'm going to do it so that I have the correct shape. And then it was ready to test on my cardboard house pattern. You can see me using the pen to try and bend it to break the fibers in the chipboard. This would have been a lot easier if I had just done the water method, but it worked in the end, and I am pretty happy with the roof. So I was happy with the size of it and the look of it, so this process worked out well and was probably one of the easiest pieces to figure out. I had also measured and cut the support beams that go on the inside of the house. They're not as important for this 1/48 scale house. They were very important for the 12 scale house because it's obviously just a lot bigger and needed more structural support, but I'm trying to copy the look of the larger house and get that pattern down. So that's why I needed to recreate these support beams to make sure that if someone did build this in 1/12, that their structure or their roof wasn't going to collapse in. So I added all of those pieces to make sure that they were working. And then I could focus on some more of the exterior pieces, such as the porch that goes to the second floor. This piece is rather thin. I probably would have added more layers to this, but I'm trying to keep with the original pattern. But I added that on and then started thinking about the supports that show up all around the outside of the house. These supports are the only part of this 1/48 scale house that I am hand cutting, but I do add it back into my pattern a little bit later. As I said, I'm kind of going back and forth adding things as I see fit. So I am going to, in the pattern, just make one long support beam that the creator of this house is going to have to custom fit to their house. And this is something that comes along with working with cardboard or any bendable materials. If you are changing things up, or if your cardboard is just a little bit of a different thickness, you may need to custom cut your supports, or someone may find that they don't want supports at all. So that process worked really well, and this is pretty much the house being done. I am very happy with how it's looking. I feel like it's really mimicking the original. So now we have to move to the tower, which I'm not looking forward to. Thinking back to when I originally built this house, the tower was the biggest pain in the rear. Trying to get this rounded shape fit to my house, which was a bunch of angles, but we're gonna go for it and see how it goes. I'm using the string trick to get the circumference of the tower because the tower is one flat sheet of cardboard that was pulled around a circle to create the tower appearance. So I need to figure out how big that flat piece needs to be, and I need to figure out the diameter of the circles inside so that I can accurately make the tower. These are all the pieces that I need, I think, to make the tower correctly. There is that extra piece sticking out to the right because originally I thought that's how I was going to attach the top, but I do end up removing it later. Here you can see I am doing the water trick where I am wetting down the chipboard before putting it over a rounded surface. I'm going to do this on something like a glue bottle, something that's close to the correct diameter. It doesn't have to be exact, but something just to get the chipboard rounded so that it's not as hard to pull around the circles when it's time to put the tower together. I did find some smaller glue bottles that I ended up using, but this worked beautifully. The chipboard curved so well and actually makes me want to use chipboard more in curved situations. And I really love how this tower is coming together. Even though it seemed like this tiny tower was going to be easier than its original 12 scale counterpart, I did have to go through several circles to get just the right size that was going to fit the tower body. So after I went through all of that, I did find a circle that fit really well and I was happy with. And as you can see, I had put some laser cut lines on the inside to help me line up the pattern. Then I could add in each individual floor until essentially I have 3 floors inside of the tower. Now, as I was doing this, I started to realize that this flap was a little bit more of a hindrance than a help. The interior circles were strong enough to keep the tower in its position, so I didn't need to attach it at the top, and I was having a hard time figuring out how to fit it to the house with that piece hanging on, so I just cut it off. This is where the original 12 scale tower gave me a lot of issues as I was trying to fit it up against the house. Now, the nice thing about having this house pattern in my computer is that I can figure out the exact angle that will work up against the wall because it's a pattern that I already have in the computer because the wall is already in the computer. So I was able to cut out pieces that should cover up this area very easily. Although the vertical part of this connection was working out really well, the horizontal part was a bit more of a challenge. Now, this video footage is a little bit fuzzy, but I'm trying to show you here that these little pieces that come out from the circles, which are the floors that attach to the house, are not all lined up. I think you can see it a little bit here. These floors are not parallel to each other, so they're not lining up with the edge of the house. And part of the problem with that is that I didn't know where in the tower to position it as I was gluing it. So I added a line down the center of the tower and a line down the center of the floor so that when I start to attach it, I not only know vertically where the floor needs to go, I know horizontally where to line up the center of the floor. So in theory, adding this one line to the pattern should help me line up all of these floors so that they exactly are parallel to each other and hit the house perfectly from the center of the tower. So here you can see as I'm putting it together, and I'm much happier with how these floors line up with one another. They are going to work so much better. And in turn, it makes it easier to add on these vertical cover pieces to the side because all of the floors line up, which those pieces have to glue onto. And now I have a tower that perfectly fits to the side of my house. And I'm so happy. And as you can see, I went through several tower variations, but eventually we did get there. And in order to continue the top railing of the tower for anyone who's using the pattern who wants it, I did add an extra piece that can be glued on, and it has an allowance on the bottom for the roof so that everything fits really well and you have a complete tower edge at the top. To complete the tower, I added this little porch to the outside. This was in the original cardboard house pattern, and I think it looks really nice on the outside of the tower. So now that the tower has been defeated and conquered, or whatever you want to say, I need to work on these stairs. These stairs are possibly the most organic, least geometrical part of this project. And at first I didn't even really know what parts of these stairs to measure to put into the computer. So I just decided to go for it and see what I could come up with. In order to measure the length of the stairs, which are just individual pieces I glued on top of each other, I'm just laying a string across the top of them and then I'm measuring that. And I don't really know how that's going to translate to the shapes in my computer, but we're going to give it a try. Once I cut everything out from the original dimensions, the few I was able to take, I just put it up against the house and I decided to start seeing if I was even able to build stairs based on the pieces I laser cut. So I first added this little slide looking piece, and then I added some supports that are going to hold it up. The slide is basically going to be the spine of my stairs. The stairs are going to sit against the spine. This is not how the original stairs were built. They were just glued one on top of each other, but the pieces for the stairs are going to be so small, and I think that would be so incredibly frustrating to try and do. So that's why I think putting it up against something will be an easier way to construct the stairs. To make the individual steps, I layered 3 pieces of chipboard and made them the width of the steps that I wanted, and then started cutting pieces from it. I thought this would be easier in a pattern than having to construct 3 layers of steps each one at a time. And that started hurting my hand, so I decided to change up the pattern, and I made them lengthwise so that all I had to do was take out an easy cutter to cut the stairs apart. This was a lot less cutting, and then I also made the width of the slide part a lot skinnier. This was going to help me make it where the stairs could kind of more naturally move back and forth because they weren't hitting up against the wide slide piece. So in the end, this is what I came up with, and I think it's a much easier way to construct stairs as compared to the original way that I did it, and I'm pretty happy with the result. And of course, if someone does make this pattern in the future, they can make stairs however they like or omit them completely. But now I have stair pattern to go into my computer.
There's no reason to sugarcoat it. That pattern was pain in the butt. But now it is all officially in the computer. It is not a pattern that you can print out yet. That will be my upcoming job. Now that I have all of the pieces, I can name them, I can make directions, I can put them into a PDF document, so if you don't have a laser cutter, you can cut all the pieces out by hand. And that's going to take a little bit of time because all the patterns that I send out from Bentley House Minis, I want to make sure they are straightforward and easy to read and use. I do plan to have that pattern finished before the next cardboard shop video, the video where I'm going to be taking the cardboard house apart and using it in a different way. But now that I have the pattern figured out and I have a teeny tiny little cardboard house, I thought what is more appropriate than to recreate the 1/12 scale cardboard house in 1/48 scale so that I have a memory of this house. This wasn't part of the video plan when I started out, but I just can't help thinking how amazing it would be to see the cardboard house all painted like it is right now. So let's go ahead and get started on the 1/48 scale cardboard house remake.
I'm going to go through the painting process rather quickly just because you all have watched me paint things several times on this channel, but I will still highlight things that might be different or I might be using a certain material. So hopefully I can answer any questions that you might have about what you're seeing on screen. I first had to add the trim, which was easily made in the computer by just taking the shapes and making a frame around each one of the shapes. I used the water process again to make sure it fit really well to any of the surfaces that were curved. I'm using one of my favorite materials, the DAP lightweight spackling, to go over the outside of the cardboard house structure. This is because the original cardboard house was completely covered in a mixture of drywall compound and Elmer's glue. This helped support the cardboard, but it also gave it a really textured look, so I want to make sure and get that in my replica. I am also going to take the lazy way out when it comes to the flooring. If I was going to individually lay little wood slats for the wooden floor, it would take me years. Maybe not years, but it would take me quite a while. So instead, I'm going to lay down some spackling. I smoothed it out with a brush with a little bit of water on it so it was as flat as possible. And then I'm going to use an acid brush to make strokes in the compound so it looks like little planks of wood. I'm letting that dry, and in the meantime, I realized I totally forgot a part of the cardboard house. There is a little cover for this porch area, and I completely missed it. So to start adding this porch, I'm using a strip of chipboard that's going to let me know where the porch cover needs to be attached. And then I cut out a circle of chipboard, and this is going to help me figure out what this, well, I guess it's like a little roof. It's a porch roof. I used the water bending method to fit it around the tower, and then I cut it off where I felt it looked the best. Then I traced it onto a post-it so that I can add it into my pattern later once I'm done with the painting process. And then I attached my roof. So that's how I quickly came up with a part of the pattern that I was missing, and might have continued to miss if I didn't decide to finish this little version of the house. I used an old towel for the 1/12 scale version of this house to make it look like it had a thatched roof. So instead of doing that and trying to find some kind of fibers that were in scale, I decided to do the same thing I did with the floor, where I added a thin layer of the lightweight spackling on top of the roof, and then I just used an acid brush to pull down on the spackling so that it looks like little individual fibers. And I'm hoping that how I paint this will show the difference between the flooring and the roofing. I let everything completely dry overnight, and then I tried to mix up a coat of paint that matched my original cardboard house. This is just white and brown mixed, and it comes out this kind of peachy color. It's almost a light pink, but it was pretty close to the original, so I decided to go for it. I'm painting all of the walls, the ceilings, everything with this base coat. Then I could use a detail brush and move on to the trim and all the supports. These are going to be painted in gray. I don't know if this is the correct gray, but it was pretty close to the original, and I'm pretty sure I just used a gray straight out of the bottle, so it may be the exact same one. The original cardboard house had a stone floor on the bottom level, and I didn't want to cut out all those individual stones, so I'm adding a wood floor on the bottom level as well. So that will be a difference between the two versions. I'm using two different color browns, one for the roof, for the thatch roof, and then one for the floor. I thought this would make a bigger difference in the type of texture that it looked like, but I really just ended up not liking the difference between the two. So what I did was I took each brown and kind of used them as highlights in the different parts of the house. So it melded them together, I think, so it looks like they are all in the same universe, even though they still look different. They don't look too different. And then I added quite a bit of the wall color, the light brown, over the top to give texture to the thatch roof, and I think it looks a bit more dry that way. I had pre-painted some cardstock and let it dry. It is the same gray color as the trim. I cut it into thin strips, and then I started cutting them apart even further to create these tiny bricks. These show up all over the exterior wall of the cardboard house, and I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it, if I was just going to paint them on, but then I decided I would have more control if they were little bits of paper that I glued onto the house. So I did this on the house structure and the tower, and you will see my process is a little messy. I use the toothpick and my fingers to wipe some of the glue off, and this is because I first apply the glue to the wall, but then if I need to take some off, I just wipe it off onto my finger, and then I can pick up the same brick with my toothpick to apply it to the wall. This is kind of messy, but it's fairly easy to wash my hands after I'm done applying all the bricks, and there's no harm, no foul, as long as I'm using a non-toxic glue. Looking closer at the original cardboard house, I realized there were little hand-painted dots in bricks, so I went back and added those, and we were getting pretty close to being done here, except for some chalk pastel. I shaved down some chalk pastel that I thought matched the original, but it was way too yellow. I was not liking it very much, so I found what I think was the original color that I used on the original cardboard house, although it comes out much brighter here, and I don't know if that's because my chalk pastel has rubbed off over the years, if it's faded over the years, or if it's just the fact that this is a much smaller house and there's just not as much room for the original wall color to shine through because the chalk pastel spreads a bit more on the smaller surface. I removed any excess with a keyboard vacuum, and this helped dull it down just a little bit. And then I sealed the chalk pastel with a matte coating spray, and the project was finished. So you'll have to let me know what you think after all of this work. Was it worth it to paint this tiny little cardboard house to match its original? I think it would be so fun to see this under a dome, like a glass dome, and actually make some kind of grass or some kind of setting, maybe to match the cardboard house book where it talks about like a fairy tale setting. You'll have to let me know what you think about this tiny house down in the comments.
I am officially obsessed with this itty bitty cardboard house. I mean, look how tiny it is. So tiny. And in a video a long time ago, I 3D scanned Miss Periwinkle, which was the original resident of this house. I have printed her in 1/24 scale. I think it would be fun to try to print her in 1/48 scale and actually get Miss Periwinkle in this tiny little house. And then I was thinking, what if I tried to do all of the furniture this size, and actually, because my 1/12 scale doesn't have the furniture anymore. What if I remade all of the furniture as well? It's amazing how just like a brand new project sneaks up on you. Working on this little house brought up so many memories from when I worked on the original, and it's got me that much more excited for continuing to work on the cardboard shop. Now, I thought this video might be short. I was wrong. So I won't be discussing the future of the cardboard shop and the plans and the design and the ideas in this video. I will make a whole separate video for that in the future. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, I think I'm finally done. I think this video is finished. I hope you all have a very creative week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Gosh, if you're seeing dust, I'm sorry. It's very difficult to dust the top of this. I wish with all my heart that I could shrink my cardboard art. I guess I've been doing it the hard way all these years. But if blip 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 blip. Oh my god. A tiny house. Oh no! Run! You either got it or you don't got it. That's enough of that.